This is attorney Woody Claremont, and I wanted to talk to you about the case of the NAACP versus Alabama. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was established in 1909 and is America's oldest, largest civil rights organization. It was formed in New York City by white and black activists, partially in response to the ongoing violence against African Americans across the country. In the NAACP's early decades, its anti-lynching campaign was central to its agenda. During the Civil Rights era in the 1950s and 1960s, the group won major legal victories, and today the NAACP has more than 2,200 branches and half a million members worldwide. The case itself is cited as NAACP versus Alabama, 357 U.S. 449, 1958. The parties included the petitioner as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, and the respondent, which was the state of Alabama through its Attorney General. In terms of history, the NAACP was banned in Alabama in 1956 after the state accused the organization of violating a law requiring foreign corporations to register. In terms of background, in 1956, Alabama Attorney General John M. Patterson filed a lawsuit against the NAACP, claiming that the organization had violated the law by operating in the state without registering. The state alleged that the NAACP had opened a regional office, recruited members, and solicited contributions. The NAACP was also accused of supporting the Montgomery bus boycott, as well as the admission of Autherine Lucy to the University of Alabama. By way of court order, the state judge issued an injunction that prohibited the NAACP from operating in Alabama, including fundraising, collecting dues, and recruiting new members. The NAACP denied the charges but agreed to abide by the injunction in the meantime. When it reached the Supreme Court level, the NAACP had appealed the ban, and it resulted in the 1958 case of NAACP versus Alabama before the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing that the statute did not apply to its political activities. The Supreme Court did rule in favor of the NAACP, finding that the organization had the right to freedom of association and thus could not be forced to disclose its membership lists. The case was remanded to the Alabama court, but the Alabama court then refused to try the case. In terms of resumption of operations, after three more appeals to the Supreme Court, the NAACP was able to resume its operations finally in Alabama in 1964. Looking through the legal history, this case began when the NAACP had filed a lawsuit against the state of Alabama, asserting that the state's demand for its membership list violated their rights to free association and free speech under the First Amendment, as well as their right to due process under the 14th Amendment. You have to keep in mind that this was a tactic to terrorize the NAACP, as release of those membership lists would mean that their individual members would become targeted and harassed, and that this would be a way to try to destroy the operations of the NAACP in the Alabama state region. Initially, the Circuit Court of Montgomery County sided with Alabama, ordering the NAACP to disclose its membership records. The NAACP turned around and appealed this decision, and thus this is when the case reached the United States Supreme Court. The initial ruling at the trial court level had been, as I indicated, that they ruled in favor of the state of Alabama, ordering the NAACP to turn over its membership lists and asserting that the state's right to regulate the organization within its jurisdiction was properly permitted. This effectively resulted in a ban of the NAACP, and the NAACP, of course, stopped its operations because it was not going to disclose its membership lists, which then would result in their members being harassed. The case was represented by Thurgood Marshall. Charles Hamilton Houston at this time actually had passed away, and therefore it was Thurgood Marshall and other civil rights attorneys that litigated the case. The Alabama was represented by its Attorney General. It implicated the right to free association and free speech under the First Amendment, as well as the right to due process under the 14th Amendment. When the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the NAACP, reversing the actions of the Alabama trial court decision, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the compelled disclosure of the membership lists violated the right to free association under the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights, and that the state had not demonstrated a sufficient justification for mandating such a disclosure. Moreover, Thurgood Marshall himself later on would go to become a U.S. Supreme Court Justice himself after his efforts as being one of the most successful civil rights attorneys in the NAACP. The effect of the holding in NAACP versus Alabama set a significant precedent for protecting the rights of organizations to maintain the confidentiality of their membership lists. It also reinforced the importance of free association, particularly for civil rights organizations, and established legal protections against state interference in such matters. because, again, being mindful, if they could target members of the NAACP and intimidate them or frighten them, this would be counterproductive to the efforts of the NAACP in combating racism and fighting for civil rights. This was pivotal to the civil rights movement, contributing to a legal framework that safeguarded the rights of individuals and organizations to engage in political and social advocacy without fear of reprisal or retaliation. It affirmed the principle that freedom of association is fundamental to the preservation of a civilized and democratic orderly society, influencing subsequent cases and legislation aimed at protecting civil rights. I hope you enjoyed this moment in civil rights history. This is Attorney Woody Claremont signing off. Have a wonderful day.